We'll get into the Eagles ring ceremony from last night and more, but this story from Gruden, who, see Christian Hackenberg got released the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Gruden is blaming the CBA for Hackenberg essentially stinking. I mean, he essentially says, like, the way the CBA is structured, that, these guys are kind of unable to progress like they did back in the day here. So everybody is an expert out there on Hackenberg, he said. He thinks he can't play, Gruden said. Of course, he cut him. He says it's unfortunate. They think he can't play. I cut him to confirm that he can't play, but everybody else says he can't play. He says it's unfortunate, this whole collective bargaining agreement. How do you develop a quarterback? I don't know how you do it. John, does he have a point?
He does have a point, but that's bad news for the Oakland Raiders, obviously, if he's given up. Everybody complains about it. There's not enough time in the offseason. Talked about that at length with John DeFilippo when he was here last year. So everybody thinks that, but at the same time, everybody has to play under the same rules. So it's sort of the organization that does the best job, even though they're hamstrung, that ultimately wins. And I think the Eagles, as you've seen with the way they built up sort of a staff and around Carson Wentz, and it started with Doug, but also Frank Reich and John, having all those guys who are really well-versed at teaching quarterback play, I think it helps immensely. And then you have to have sort of the type of player that wants to do stuff on his own. And that was Carson again when he went out and did work on his own with quarterback gurus like Tom House and people like that to work on his mechanics. So I think everybody complains about it, but it's not like you're being singled out.
Yeah.
Everybody has to work under the same system.
Right. No, I mean, and he said, look, he's been working on changing his stroke, his passing motion. I think he did that. We just didn't have enough reps to take a good look at him since we were further along the road with some of our other guys. We didn't have the space. He went on to say, it's hard enough to get Connor Cook enough reps, let alone a fourth guy. It really depresses me how we can't spend more time with these young quarterbacks, and it's really going to be an impactful situation on the NFL in the future. My question, I guess, is how do they not have the ability to have multiple guys taking reps at the same time?
Well, they do, but understand there's so many limitations in the off season that I think people don't realize. It starts with the fact that you can never put the pads on to begin with. You can also only have the players for 6 hours a day, and there's limits on the actual practice time and how much they can be on the field with coaches versus working with themselves. There's all these little intricate details. And for a guy like John, who was around under the previous collective bargaining agreements where it was completely different, and basically when the season ended, you could have your quarterback, especially for a guy like that, in the next week, give him a couple days off and start working with them. And the younger quarterbacks, it's drastically different, and it's much more difficult. And I think a lot of people who have questioned in Oakland whether John can survive in this environment, you can complain about it all you want, but that's the reality. So you have to accept it and move on and make the best of it. And I don't know if he can do that.
Yeah, and you're right that every team has to kind of go through this, and you wonder if, like, down the road they make some special, tweaks for a quarterback or skill position players. Or do they already have that in place?
No, they don't have that in place, but anything could happen with the next CBA. They could revisit it. I find it very hard to believe that the players are going to give back more work in the off season. I mean, that's a quality of life issue with them. So I don't think it's going to change moving forward. And again, I think you almost have to have a quarterback, and that's a position almost by definition that you need leadership, and part of leadership is working hard. And we hear all the cliches about the great quarterbacks and how hard they work, first guy in the building, last guy to leave. but generally they're true. And the truly great quarterbacks, they tend to get there because they work so much on their own. They realize, I can't just leave it as minicamp's done, I'm going away for 6 weeks. I'm not going to do anything until I show up at training camp. If you do that, you have no chance to succeed in this league. So I think you have to identify guys who understand that and are going to work on their own. And it's not easy.
John McMullen with us. So, John, LeGarrette Blount was back in Philly last night. That was a name as we were trying to predict who would show up at the ring ceremony. LeGarrette Blount was a guy that was at that ring ceremony last night. Were you there? What was it like? Tell us about the rings as they finally get rings fit for a king, you write on our website at 97.3 ESPN.
Yeah, basically everybody was back, I think. You name it. The guys are gone. LeGarrette Blount, Trey Burton, Bo Allen, Vinny Curry, Frank Wright, John DeFilippo, any name, Patrick Robinson, any name you can think of, everybody was back. At the ECW arena, I'm disappointed nobody got my hints. You should have gotten that, guys.
Okay, let's stop that real quick.
I said Blue Horizon because, of course, I'm thinking boxing.
No way I would envision. There was no way I would envision they would pick that building. I mean, that building, for all intents and purposes, is not thought to be the nicest or classiest of buildings, right?
It was a dump. They did redo it, though, so it's not the dump it once was. So they did redo it a lot, and it's a lot better than it used to be when it was the ECW arena. But there's not a lot of venues in South Philadelphia that you can use that big for that kind of party. But, yeah, I mean, everybody was back.
Was the media invited?
No. No, red carpet only. And that's understandable. They wanted it to be a private affair. They made it very clear to us. In fact, that's why I said they didn't want us even publicizing where it was going to be, because they wanted to keep it private for the players, their families, and friends. And it's understandable. It's their honor. But yeah, I mean, everybody was back, and it tells you what it means to be on a Super Bowl championship team, and LeGarrette specifically. I mean, I don't know how that guy walks around with all the rings he's got. I mean, that's an extra 20 pounds.
They got to be weighing down his hands. John McMullen with us. So, John, somebody asked you if you get a ring, right? That's not how it works. But
a lot of people have. I'm surprised how many people have asked me, do we get rings? I'm like, no, they don't like us very much. They're not going to give us rings. Trust me on that.
If there's enough people that ask you that question, you could start your GoFundMe account to get up to the $11,000, right? Isn't there some limited number? Like there's 127 rings that you could buy exclusively or something like that. That's how many they're selling.
Yeah, and everybody can get their replica rings, but you know. If you want to be a journalist, you want to be a reporter, you don't really want a ring for a team you've been covering because you try to be objective. And, well, at least I hope I'm objective. So I don't really look at an Eagles ring and say, ooh, I'd like to have that. But fans, yeah. I mean, if you got an extra $11,000, go get it.
Now, there's a lower level, too. There's like that's the one that's the most like the Super Bowl ring. Then there's a more cost-effective level, too, if I remember reading that correctly.
Yeah, I think it's about a little under $700 for the replica ring, so that's still a nice chunk of change. But hey, the Eagles didn't invite us, so I'm not going to sell merchandise for them.
That's true. What about some of the nuances that are in the ring, though? I thought they really gave it a lot of thought. There were a lot of clever little, basically secrets inside the ring, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Yeah, I thought the two most interesting was on the bezel of the ring, there was 127 diamonds, which was the combined numbers of the Philly special uniform numbers, 30, 88, and 9 for Corey Clement, Trey Burton, Nick Foles. That was interesting. And also on the inside of the ring, they had the underdog mask, which I thought was really interesting. And a really nice, yeah, that thing is, you know, we were having this discussion on the sidelines about how much the ring would cost and how gaudy it would be. And the Patriots ended up spending, I think we looked it up, it was $36,000 for their Super Bowl 51 rings. The Eagles didn't announce how much these rings cost, but it's got to be more than that.
There was a lot going on there, and they really didn't, spare detail. Apparently they're the first team to get like their signatures engraved underneath there. They've got as you said, the underdog mask there. It was very detailed. That was the real deal. But as Doug said, 12:01, time to move on. But don't they have a ring ceremony like for the fans at one of the games?
Yeah, I'm sure they will. That hasn't been announced yet. But from their standpoint, yeah, Doug mentioned earlier this week, 12:01, June 15th, which, as I said, it was probably a little bit later than that.
Oh, yeah.
You can see from Instagram, people were having some fun. So, yeah, I mean, at some point they do have to move on. And obviously that was the last time. I think that was his point. I just mentioned all the names, and we mentioned LeGarrette and everybody being back. It's the last time that group's going to be together. And now this is a new group, and it's time to try to go back to back.
John, what about the two phrases that are in script on there? We all we got, we all we need, and family on both sides.
Yeah, well, we all know the narratives the Eagles used. That was one of them, and certainly the underdog mask, and that was embraced after Carson went down. So I've always said I don't think all of them were necessarily true, but if it works for you, use it. I think that was the best thing. Yeah, exactly. I think that was the best thing for the Eagles in the fact that it doesn't matter what we believe or what I believe. In that locker room, in the NovaCare complex, they believed they were the underdogs. They believed nobody liked them, and they used that. And, hey, it worked. I applaud them. But as I said, I don't think it was necessarily all true.
Hey, John, we hinted at Corey Graham. It looks like he has hinted that he would like to continue playing and that he would not rule out Philadelphia. So is that an obvious sign that the Eagles are just kind of taking their time, taking a look at some young guys, but when push comes to shove, that Corey Graham will be the guy they turn back to?
Yeah, I've been talking about that a lot. I think it's dependent on what happens. I mean, remember, you have two different groups. If it were up to Doug Peterson and Jim Schwartz, especially, I don't think there's any question that Corey Graham would be back. But they're not making the decisions as far as the roster goes. That's Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas. So from their standpoint, they would like to get younger and cheaper because of all the salary cap issues, not only this year but moving forward. So if a guy like Trey Sullivan can step up into the role as opposed to a veteran minimum salary, we've talked about it with Donnie Jones versus Cam Johnston at punter, positions like that. Maybe they'll go in that direction. And I think one of the underreported aspects of that, one of the reasons Corey played so much last season was because of the Jordan Hicks injury. So you also have to add that into it. If Jordan's healthy, Nigel's healthy for 16 games, they're going to be on the field. Those two linebackers are going to be on the field all the time. And then you don't need that third safety as much. So that could play into it as well.
Yeah, and I know you said that that's one area that the Eagles may be uncomfortable, is that they do need the third safety, that there's a lot of young guys that you're putting a lot of stock in if you don't bring a veteran in.
Yeah, and that's where I said, Jim, if it were up to Jim, he'd bring it back because he just wants to feel comfortable in a situation to, the dominoes start to fall. When Jordan's down, that sort of, we talked about Michael Kendrick stepping up, he did. But in a lot of nickel and dime situations, it was also essentially Malcolm Jenkins playing linebacker. Now, Malcolm's not going to play linebacker if Jordan and Nigel are out there. So if Malcolm's not playing linebacker, you don't need the third safety to play quite as much, and you could probably get away with Trey Sullivan. So it's sort of one of those things you have to weigh, and every team does it. And, the dominoes fall with injuries. And like I said, if you want the comfort factor, you certainly want Corey Graham. But then you start to think to yourself, if Jordan and Nigel are healthy, he's not going to play that much. So that's where it comes into where you sort of perhaps roll the dice and say we can get by with Trey Sullivan. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do, but that's sort of the stuff that Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas have to weigh.
Do you think any of the corners they would look to move in training camp to maybe try out at that safety spot?
Well, I think Rasul would be the most likely, but they haven't done it yet, and that's been confirmed by everybody, Jim Schwartz, Corey Unlin, and Rasul himself. So right now, maybe that's something down the road, but he'd be the one guy because of his frame that you look at and say could project the safety down the line, but the Eagles haven't gone down that path just yet.
Today must have been, or I guess sometime in the recent past, the empty pea cups must have been passed around, because I see a lot of guys suspended today for violating the league substance abuse policy, including two-time offender David Irving from the Cowboys, who was suspended for 4 games last year. Also, it appears there's some reports out there that the Raiders fear imminent league discipline for Martavius Bryant is on the way, and some other interesting names. So I guess the one time a year is starting to get guys.
Yeah, and you know, what day is it today?
That's
Friday. Right. That's the NFL. But yeah, I mean, it's almost an annual tradition in Dallas to have at least one defensive line suspended. And obviously, anytime you talk about Martavis Bryant, he's already been suspended for a year. That's obviously very, very serious with him. It's difficult. I mean, that's one of the reasons you talk about a guy like Bryant specifically, because he's so talented, and we always talk about Josh Gordon. If you've seen some of the pictures of him, people raving about the physical shape he's in, and there's no question he certainly is. But if you're a coach, you just can't count on guys like that. So it's tough to sort of prepare for your season. If you're saying I'm going to lean on Martavis Bryant, it could come back to haunt you.
No doubt. We got the Eagles with their rings last night, in which looked like a real fun time to kind of cap off that 2017 Super Bowl. If you haven't seen the rings, you can check them out at 97.3 ESPN.com. And finally, John, with the Eagles, it looks like some more reshaping of the medical department.
Yeah, I think that's one of those stories that is kind of strange, to be honest. And it started with them finally naming a new head trainer this week. Because if you think about all of the players the Eagles have rehabbing, and big name players, starting with Carson Wentz, but Jason Peters, Jordan Hicks, and, Brandon Graham, Tim Jernigan, all the names, they didn't have a head trainer from when Chris Peduzzi resigned about 2 weeks after the Super Bowl till last week. And that's one of those things which makes you start scratching your head. And now they've moved on from their two of the team doctors, including the top doc in the organization for the past 20 years. So clearly the Eagles were not happy with certain things that went on, which is kind of a surprise, because what did they do yesterday? They got Super Bowl rings. So it's a bit of a strange story.
Yeah, and I saw a story that's been kind of circulating around Twitter about the secretary that Chip Kelly fired. The team reached out to her and gave her a ring. Is that legit?
That is legit. Longtime secretary that Chip did fire. Chip's not the most popular guy. It is amazing how everyone loved Chip Kelly, and now he's the villain. I mean, that's just a reality of sort of coaching changes that people don't take into account when coaches get hired and fired. There's a lot of support staff that goes with them because the new coach wants to bring in his own people. So I'm not going to kill him for that. But it was a classy move for the Eagles to say she had worked there for so long. and she deserved a ring, and so I applaud the organization for that. But I can't kill Chip Kelly for bringing in somebody he felt comfortable with.
John,
and I'd love to kill Chip Kelly if I could.
John, when Gil brought that story up, I immediately thought of Harold Carmichael, because I remember Harold had been, his office was right off the locker room for years, and that was Chip that kind of said, yeah, you know what, we're gonna go in a different direction. I mean, it was Jeffrey ultimately that broke the news to him, but Harold Carmichael, a longtime Eagle, you wonder if he got a ring.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. Harold's been around almost every day, so he's back, sort of in the family as well. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of those underreported things, and as I said, that people don't think about, and that's why I never advocate a coach gets fired. Obviously, that's the reality of this profession. It's always going to happen, but it really affects so many people's lives that you don't even know. And again, with the support staff and things of that nature, because there's usually significant turnover. But, Jeffrey, he deserves a lot of credit for all the rings he gave out, not only the players, but basically the entire organization got a ring. So, and as we mentioned, many people who aren't technically involved. So, he deserves a lot of credit for that.
By the way, we talked about Hackenberg earlier. He is visiting the Patriots. And how about the story about Belichick? Did you see this, guys, where Belichick essentially canceled the last 2 days of OTAs and had like a history of football lesson that he gave instead? That's one way to go.
How about that? Bill having a little bit of fun. That's fun for Bill.
Yeah.
That's going to be fun for the players. But it tells you, look, these guys, it is not valuable. Especially with veteran players. I tell you and Pete all the time, if you don't have pads on, it's not valuable. It's why John Harbaugh gets suspended, gets 2 days taken away every year. These coaches do not care.
So they get themselves in trouble on purpose.
Oh, well, yeah, not this time, but last time John was fined, he acted like he didn't know the rules. He had the rookies at rookie camps in pads. I mean, the guy's been a coach in this league for years and years and years, and he's trying to pretend he didn't know they couldn't wear pads. To him, it was more important to see 10 minutes of them in pads than 3 days and just running around. And that's sort of, we talked about the quarterback aspect of it. Yeah, I mean, coaches in this league pull out their hair because these things are just not that valuable. And that's why last year you saw the Eagles take a day off for paintball. You mentioned Bill Belichick, who, Lane Johnson says they have no fun. He's doing history of football dissertations because it's not valuable to them.
What is valuable is Johnny Mack, and he's here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on the Sports Bash. Enjoy the weekend, pal.
Hey, you too, guys. Thank you.